I'm tired and I wanna go to bed. I had a little drink about an hour ago, and it's gotten right to my head. Wherever I may roam, by land or sea or foam, you will always hear me singing this song, showing me the way to go home.
Heresy thinking, that is. I'm speaking here of Messianic Christians and mainline evangelicals. Messianic Christians often get very excited about this concept, and mainline evangelicals get a little skittish over it. Now, if you're in one of those groups, again, you might be missing something. On the one hand, the Noahide laws, again, minus the one about eating meat cooked well done, broadly focus on points of morality that are echoed in Christian teaching, like the New Testament. Those moral points certainly produce a stable culture and a stable society, but there's more to the Noahide law idea that Christians won't like, or at least shouldn't like. The Noahide law idea is often articulated with the teachings of the famous 12th century, that is medieval, Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, or Maimonides. Here's what he said about them, quote, "Whosoever accepts the 7 commandments and carefully observes them is among the pious ones of the nations of the world and enjoys a share of the hereafter, provided that he accepts and performs them," unquote. A biblical scholar, Nahum Sarna, comments on this excerpt from Maimonides that we just read. Sarna writes, quote, "Maimonides then goes on to stipulate that if a non-Jew practices these commandments solely for philosophic reasons, he would not be considered among the pious Gentiles who merit a share of the hereafter," unquote. Now, if you're a Messianic believer, Messianic Christian, or broadly an evangelical Christian, and you have a fondness for Jewish things, you might not want to get too enthused about the Noahide laws, because what I just read was a serious shot at your core beliefs. The Noahide law idea is teaching salvation through law keeping. It's a clear contradiction of the Christian notion of salvation by faith in response to the grace of God shown to us on the cross of Jesus Christ. So you might want to check your enthusiasm a little bit for the Noahide laws, or at least be better informed as what is some of the theological baggage that goes along with them.
Show me the way to go home. I'm tired and I want to go to bed. I had a little drink about an hour ago, and I got right to my head.
Someone who's been preaching Jesus to the Jewish community for almost 50 years and say, "You're not a follower of Jesus. You're a wolf in sheep's clothing." Why? Because I tell the truth about the Noahide laws. You say, "Why do you preach them?" I don't preach them. I preach Jesus. I preach Yeshua. I don't support the Noahide laws. I don't preach the Noahide laws. But in point of fact, every believer lives by the Noahide laws. If you are a true follower of Jesus, then you practice those and many other things. You don't commit idolatry, and you don't blaspheme, and you don't commit adultery, and you don't steal, and you believe in establishing courts of justice, and planned guillotine genocide of all Christians and non-Jews worldwide. Planned guillotine genocide of all Christians and non-Jews worldwide. Planned guillotine genocide of all Christians and non-Jews worldwide. Look at someone who's been preaching Jesus to the Jewish community for almost 50 years and say, "You're not a follower of Jesus. You're a wolf in sheep's clothing." Why? Because I tell the truth about the Noahide laws. You say, "Why do you preach them?" I don't preach them. I preach Jesus. I preach Yeshua. I don't support the Noahide laws. I don't preach the Noahide laws. But in point of fact, every believer lives by the Noahide laws. If you are a true follower of Jesus, then you practice those and many other things. You don't commit idolatry, and you don't blaspheme, and you don't commit adultery, and you don't steal, and you believe in establishing courts of justice, and would affirm, yeah, you shouldn't commit adultery, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't blaspheme God, etc. All right, you should establish courts of law. That's all good. Would affirm, yeah, you shouldn't commit adultery, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't blaspheme God, etc. All right, you should establish courts of law. That's all good.
My name is Daniel. I'm from Norway. Many years we've been a Christian country. We had a state church, but we removed this because of the growth of atheists. So the Noahide Code, the first rule is do not deny God. Then how can you expect countries such as Norway to implement this rule if you have a growing population that do not believe in it?
Okay, very good question. In America, there was this challenge because the separation of church and state, meaning that the government cannot, it's freedom of religion, and the government cannot impose any religion on any people. And if you want to go to a church, a mosque, and then I argue that, by the way, marriage shouldn't be imposed. This to give you a little side thought, that marriage is between man and wife, and if the government should not interfere in redefining that, and if they want to, they could issue a license to marry, and if you decide to get married in a church, mosque, or synagogue, it's your choice, and not to get married at all. The same rights should apply, just like they issue a driver's license. But to answer your question, the American government had that issue between church and state, and they overcame it by saying it's education. Obviously, if you're going to say there's no God, one of the first laws is to believe in God. There's a famous saying: "There's no atheist in a foxhole." Even though they tried to. The issue of having a church controlling the government was very dangerous, because, like you see what's going on in the Middle East or what happened in Europe, is dangerous, because then you don't have freedom of religion. You have one religion, that's all. If you don't dance to their party, you're out on a stake or somewhere. But the point is, they overcame it in America by having it promoted as education and so on. It doesn't have to say it's respect God. It doesn't have to say you have to pray to in a church or in. It says respect the higher authority. But I think if they overcame that issue in America with church and state, I think the same issue could be overcome in Norway. And I welcome you to present it, and at least to see if this is an issue. And I'd like to hear back. Anyone wants to email me, you can kindly email me, Rabbi Cohen at Noahide or Cohen48@gmail. If you want to email me these questions. One more question.
Start the mill! Fucking chef!
Are non-Jews obligated to keep the 7 Noahide laws? And if they are, how are they supposed to know that they're obligated to keep them? And how are they supposed to know what they are?
Well, the nations, every person in the world has to keep the 7 Noahide laws.
How will we know when the Messiah comes?
How will we know?
Yeah.
It says in Rambam, Shtifut Malchiot Buvad. And that means that when the kingship returns to Israel, and that there's apparently it means when militarily and politically Israel is secure.
Building the third temple. Then everybody will prosper, because this is what this temple is for the whole world.
So you think that there could be some union between all the religions as part of this?
Absolutely. We already have unity, but everybody's afraid from the terrorists. So this is our job, to unify everybody to worship the only true living God in the third temple with all the nations that will worship God.
The Messiah will be the judge.
The
Mashiach will be the judge, and not for what he sees, and not for what he hears, but what he smells.
You believe the Mashiach ben David is coming to this temple?
Is very soon, and he is a Jew, and he is not Jesus. And if the Christians want to hold it, they can hold it. But we will never change our mind. We prefer to go back to Auschwitz and not to change our religion. This is the main thing. We are loyal.
What would happen to Christians who refuse this?
Planned guillotine genocide of all Christians and non-Jews.
Because, wow. Yeah. I mean, if you were just to make up stuff, it would just literally ruin the reality, the truth of it. Like, good example. All right. We have our current events of what's going on in U.S. government. You know, I never thought that I would see this subversion of the U.S. government from the inside by no less the Republicans and the Democrats. Proof that, you know, at least, you know, the world must be ending because the Democrats and the Republicans can both agree on something, that they want to completely destroy the entire government that they pretend to be trying to uphold, which is, yeah, and then dual citizenship, you know, people with dual citizenship. So they're loyal to this country and then they're loyal to this country, supposedly. So, I mean, it just raises the question, how does a man serve two masters? And as a Christian, I'm assuming that many of you may have heard that said before, and maybe you're sitting here scratching your head going, yeah, you know, how does one remain loyal to two masters? Or, you know, the actual proposal for treason and sedition, which, you know, especially with the dementia in chief, I think that that's a little bit of a irony, considering that the man literally sat here and mocked Joe Biden and then now is going down as the oldest, most insane president, who is literally like a old Roman dictator. Which, interestingly enough, you know, that's kind of goes into the story of Cincinnatus, a video that actually got, you know, deleted. Even whatever. I thought it was a pretty informative video. I thought it was actually pretty good. You know, for those of you who didn't know, the story of Cincinnatus. You know, it's I'm from Cincinnati, so I know the story of Cincinnatus, the statues. Those of you who don't know, it was about somebody, and it was obviously dramatized, but it was supposed to be, you know, about someone who actually had power, you know, infinite power, all power, and rather than abusing it, they gave it back. You know, not once, but twice. So that's where the two terms for a president actually comes in. You know, George Washington being the first example of that. Anymore, I feel like a nerd just because some of the stuff that I was taught in school, people look at me as if I'm a nerd or a crazy person for saying things out loud, such as, you know, Bibi Netanyahu is a genocidal maniac. And I don't hate the Jewish people. I try to go way out of my way to point out that there is a huge difference between someone who calls themselves Jewish and when someone says something about Jewish people. Like, for good example, this Chabad movement. There's many people that are born into it. You know what I mean? And forgive me if this offends somebody, but, you know, they're ignorant to it. You know, they're like children. They don't know any better. But once they know better, you know, I believe they call that, like, you know, accountability. Anywho, you know, the very same Torah, the very, you know, books of Moses that they sit here and they read and they study over and over and over and over. And then ironically, they will sit here and they will lament and they will cry over a stone wall, which feels no pain, but they don't lament over the suffering servant, over the Messiah. So it makes sense on why many of them are allowed to even read about that in the first place. They're in a cult. You know, the very same way the Gentiles were grafted in is the very same way the Jewish people will be grafted in the last days. That's actually the part of the prophecy of the return of Christ. we're to preach the gospel unto every living creature. How does one preach the gospel to a squirrel? You guys ever think about that? I mean, I've literally thought of that. Like, how do you preach the gospel to a squirrel? Because it says, preach the gospel unto every living creature. Or, because there's things that almost seem like contradictions. Lord, teach my hands to war and my fingers to fight, right? Well, in the context of being a Christian, a born-again Christian, how does one do that? Or bring those that would not have me reign over them and slay them before me. It actually goes into Christian history, by the way. I don't know if you guys actually looked into that, like where your Bibles actually came from. Just literally took a hiatus from the world, and I actually sought out, is my faith in vain? Am I believing in a lie? Am I deceived? Is Jesus real? Is he really who he says he is? And in my search, yes, he is exactly who he says he is. He's God in the flesh. And one day, that very same crucified Christ, beginning of Acts chapter 1, that very same Jesus will return. Well, you can read about it in Revelations. And cloud of witnesses. He's going to bring New Jerusalem with him. I never thought that I would actually go from reading the Bible to being a witness of its fulfillment, as well as several of you are. Well, if not all of you, unless you're not real and you're a bot or AI. But I hope and pray that you guys really are following after Jesus. And I hope that some of you guys, I know some people are going to be offended by the videos and some of the stuff in it, especially there's no way to even talk about this subject without people being offended. But the easiest way to prove who a Christian is in the room is the first one that usually, the first one that moves to violence is 9 times out of 10, almost always the non-Christian. And I mean Christian to the standards of Christ, not men, not theology, not doctrines of men, not religion, but what is it that Jesus actually taught? And this may be a huge shock to some of you. I hope it's not. Jesus was a Jew, like literally a Jew, from the tribe of Judah. And his apostles, I don't know if you guys know this, we call them Jews today, but, they were Israelites. They were all Jews. The first Christians were not Gentiles. They were Jews. Paul talks about this. You can read about it in your Bible. If people just literally practiced what they preached, man, wouldn't that be crazy? If people actually stop putting on fake facades, stop pretending to be something that they're not, and if they were just what they are on the inside, they were on the outside. Most Christians are just being taken for a ride, and I don't like seeing people's faith destroyed because of false prophets and false teachers. I don't like seeing people taken advantage of because of lies and deception, period. I mean, who does? And that's what most of this stuff on the internet is in the first place. It's lies, it's deceptions. I mean, you can pretend to be whatever you want. Don't put your faith and your trust into these little digital devices. Don't put your faith and your trust in a man or a group of men. They are going to let you down, okay? I don't know if you guys actually have read the Bible through more than once, but there seems to be a reoccurring theme over and over and over. Every single time man tries to do something in his own strength and his own image, he fails. Not only does it fail, oh God, it's horrible. It's horrible. It literally takes God's intervention. By the same way they were cut out of is the same way they're grafted in. By faith. Faith. It talks about in the last days that God sends them strong delusion that they might be deceived, right? Like God's allowing it. Jesus warns that the time will come when you shall, desire to see some of these things that you have heard and to not go after them. Do not be deceived. Do not be deceived. How many times did Jesus say that when they asked him about the last days? Do not be deceived. Many will come in my name. Do not be deceived. How many times, like that's a good Bible study. How many times in the New Testament does it talk about do not be deceived? Don't be deceived. Like the parts where it talks about false teachers and false prophets. If you just read those out, you can literally just sit here and give examples all day long. You don't even have to leave YouTube. I mean, you can just type in prophet. You don't even have to type in false prophet. I mean, you just think of all the people that come up on there. All these people, all dreamers of dreams. Thus saith the Lord, that God has given me a vision. God's given me a dream. God's told me to tell you this. And one thing they all got in common, apparently, God has also told them that you are going to pick up the tab. Read your Bibles like your soul depends on it. Because chances are, if you're watching a video here on the internet, you've probably come across the greatest weapon ever created, because you're holding it in your hands, you're looking at it, you're listening to me right now on it. Back in the 30s, 40s, man, they figured out the ultimate weapon, the ultimate Wunderweapon. Propaganda. Weaponized propaganda. Weaponized patriotism. And that's exactly what they're doing still today. These televisions, the phone. I mean, do you really honestly think that these people honestly care, how good of a phone, like they really want you to have a really good camera and microphone with a battery that can't be removed, with GPS tracking, because they care about you being poor, being able to make a phone call? No. They want to know what you think. They want to know what you feel. And they want you to tell them. Facebook, TikTok, all those things are literally there. They want these data centers. They need these data centers. Why? Because you are the product. You have so much data that they need a machine to figure out what to do with it. So they got ideas on what they could do with it, right? But they need these machines to be able to turn that raw data into something tangible, so they can transmute it, the lead into gold. Thesis and antithesis. I heard someone once say, it's not what the news is saying, it's what the news isn't that you should pay attention to. Because usually that's where the trick or the deception and what they're actually going for. Or, if they can't control what people think, they want to control the revolution. They want to control the uprising. They want to control this. You know what I mean? They want to control the release of the information. Damage control. I think I ran it long enough. So, love you guys. Praying for several of you. And, hey, like I said, if you guys made it this far, please definitely don't be afraid to say hi.